The day had started like any other in the small coastal town. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, and the sound of gulls circled above the fishing boats. In a quiet corner of the town stood a small mechanic's workshop, its faded sign swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, a man in his mid-30s worked with steady hands, wiping the grease off an engine part while humming an old tune. His little daughter, no more than 7 years old, sat on a wooden stool nearby, drawing shapes on scrap paper with a broken pencil. Life had not been easy for him. He had lost his wife years ago, and since then, every responsibility had rested on his shoulders. From making breakfast to tucking his daughter in at night, he had learned to balance fatherhood and hard work with quiet determination. Money was always tight, but his heart was full of patience and kindness. His daughter was his world, and no matter how tired he felt after long hours at the workshop, he never let her go to bed without a bedtime story. That evening, dark clouds began to gather over the sea. The weather forecast had warned about a heavy storm, but in this town, storms were nothing new. The man finished repairing the last car for the day, closed the creaky garage door, and picked up his daughter's hand. Together, they walked home through the narrow streets, the little girl skipping along, singing softly to herself. She was excited because her father had promised to cook her favorite soup that night. He smiled at her enthusiasm, even though his body ached from work. For him, her laughter was worth more than rest. By the time they reached their small home, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. The sky turned almost black, and the wind howled through the trees. He quickly made dinner while his daughter set the table with mismatched plates. They sat together, enjoying the warm soup, listening to the storm outside grow stronger. After dinner, he helped her into bed, reading from her favorite old storybook. Soon her eyes grew heavy, and she drifted off to sleep with a peaceful smile. He stepped outside after tucking her in, checking the locks on the garage and securing the tools. The storm had now turned violent, with sheets of rain lashing down and lightning cracking across the sky. The streets were empty, most people already sheltering indoors. Just as he was about to close the front door, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A pair of headlights flickered weakly on the flooded road leading out of town. The car seemed stuck, its engine struggling against the rising water. Without a second thought, he grabbed his raincoat and dashed into the storm. The water splashed around his boots as he fought against the wind, heading straight toward the stranded vehicle. Inside, he saw a woman gripping the steering wheel tightly, her face pale with fear. She rolled down the window slightly, her voice trembling as she said, "The car won't start. I don't know what to do." Her words almost disappeared in the roar of the storm. "Don't worry," he shouted back, his voice steady. "I'll help you. Leave the car. It's not safe here." She hesitated, but something in his tone reassured her. He opened the door, carefully helping her out as the rain soaked them both. The water was already ankle-deep on the road, and the storm showed no signs of slowing down. He led her toward his home, guiding her carefully so she wouldn't slip. She kept thanking him breathlessly, but he shook his head. "Save your strength," he said gently. "We're almost there." When they finally reached his front door, he ushered her inside, handing her a dry towel. She looked around the modest home, noticing the small bed where the little girl slept soundly, the humble kitchen with its chipped cups, and the old bookshelf filled with second-hand novels. She was surprised by the warmth of the place, so simple yet full of life. He offered her a seat near the heater and quickly prepared some tea, apologizing for the storm as if it was his fault. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You can stay here until the storm passes." She watched him move about the small kitchen, noticing how naturally he balanced everything, keeping his daughter comfortable, making sure his unexpected guest felt at home, and never once complaining about the inconvenience. He didn't ask who she was, where she came from, or why she was out in such terrible weather. His only concern was making sure she was safe. It was a kind of quiet nobility that she hadn't seen in a long time. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small house, there was warmth, safety, and something even more rare, genuine kindness from a stranger who asked for nothing in return. The storm had only grown worse as the night went on. Rain pounded against the windows, and the sound of thunder rolled through the little house like a drumbeat. Inside, the warmth of the heater and the smell of freshly brewed tea created a strange contrast, almost like two different worlds colliding, the chaos outside and the quiet safety inside. The woman sat on the small wooden chair, her clothes still damp, clutching the warm cup between her hands. She looked uneasy, though a little more at peace than when she had been trapped in her car. Across from her, the man sat with calm eyes, carefully placing another log into the small stove. He didn't say much, and she didn't either. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and this silence was filled not with awkwardness, but with a kind of unspoken gratitude. He finally broke the stillness. "You must have been heading somewhere important to be out in weather like this," he said softly, not looking directly at her. She paused for a moment before answering. "Yes, but I don't think it matters anymore. Right now, I'm just glad I made it out of that car. If you hadn't come," her voice trailed off, but the fear in her eyes spoke volumes. He gave a gentle nod. "Storms can be unforgiving, but you're safe here. That's what matters tonight." The woman glanced toward the small bedroom door, slightly ajar, where the little girl slept soundly despite the storm. "Is that your daughter?" she asked. He smiled at the mention of her. "Yes. She's the reason I keep moving forward. She's all I have." His tone carried both love and weariness, the kind only a single parent knows, the mix of pride and exhaustion from carrying the whole weight of a family on his own. The woman could see it in his eyes, a man stretched thin, yet never breaking because of the love he had for his child. Wanting to lighten the mood, he pushed a plate of leftover bread across the table toward her. "It's not much, but you should eat something." She hesitated, then took a small piece, surprised by how comforting something so simple could taste after such a frightening evening. As she chewed slowly, she studied him. His hands were rough from years of labor, his clothes plain, his hair damp from the rain. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way he moved, the way he spoke. He didn't seem embarrassed by his modest home or the fact that he had little to offer. Instead, he carried himself with the quiet pride of someone who lived honestly. After a while, he noticed her shivering slightly despite the towel. He stood up, fetched an extra blanket from the couch, and handed it to her without a word. She accepted it with a faint smile, wrapping it tightly around herself. "You didn't have to go out into the storm for me," she said quietly. "Most people would have stayed inside." He shrugged, as if the choice had been obvious. "When you see someone in trouble, you don't think twice. At least, that's how I was raised. We help when we can." Those words struck her more deeply than he could have imagined. In her world, people often helped only when it benefited them, when there was something to gain. But here was a man who expected nothing, who had risked himself for a stranger with no thought of reward. She didn't say anything more, but the thought stayed with her, like a warm ember in her heart. Hours passed, the storm still hammering against the house. The man checked the clock and sighed. "It's going to be a long night. You should try to rest. I'll keep watch in case anything happens." She looked at him, surprised. "You mean you're going to stay awake all night?" He nodded. "I'm used to it. Sometimes when my daughter was younger, she'd get sick, and I had to stay up. I'll be fine. But you've been through enough tonight." There was something deeply reassuring in his voice, and though she wanted to protest, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She leaned back on the couch, pulling the blanket tighter, and within minutes her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted into sleep with the sound of rain echoing in the background, her heart strangely calm despite everything. The man sat quietly, watching the fire flicker in the stove. His thoughts wandered, as they often did late at night. He wondered who this woman really was, why she had been driving alone on that road, and what kind of life she returned to once the storm was gone. But he didn't press for answers. Everyone had their own battles, their own stories, and it wasn't his place to dig. All he knew was that fate had placed her in his path, and helping her was simply the right thing to do. Around midnight, the little girl stirred in her bed, her small voice calling out, half asleep. He hurried to her side, brushing her hair back gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just the storm. Daddy's here." She mumbled something and drifted back into sleep. When he turned around, he noticed the woman had opened her eyes, watching the scene quietly from the couch. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she smiled faintly, as if seeing something rare and beautiful. The rest of the night passed slowly. The storm finally began to weaken, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a steady drizzle. By dawn, the world outside was washed clean but battered, fallen branches, puddles everywhere, and the road covered in mud. Inside the little house, the woman stirred awake, stretching beneath the blanket. She looked around, surprised to see him still awake, his eyes heavy, but his posture steady. "You stayed up," she said softly, almost scolding. He shrugged with a tired smile. "Told you I would." He poured her another cup of tea, and for a moment, it felt less like strangers and more like old friends sharing a quiet morning. She wanted to say more, to ask questions, to explain herself, but something held her back. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps pride, or perhaps she simply wasn't ready to reveal who she truly was. Instead, she simply thanked him again, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "You've been far kinder than I deserve." He shook his head. No one deserves to be left alone in a storm. She held his gaze for a moment, as though searching for something in his eyes. And what she found there unsettled her in the best way, a kind of goodness she had nearly forgotten existed. The storm outside had passed, but inside her heart, something new had just begun to stir. Morning light spilled softly through the curtains, painting the small living room in shades of gold. The storm had left the world damp and heavy, but inside the house there was a gentle calm, the kind that only comes after a night of chaos. The woman stretched slowly, adjusting the blanket that had kept her warm through the night. For a moment, she almost forgot she was in a stranger's home. Then her eyes fell on the little details around her, the worn photo frames on the wall, the tiny shoes lined up near the door, the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen, and she remembered. The man was already at the stove, stirring a pot of porridge. His daughter sat at the table, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair a little messy, but her face bright. "Good morning, Daddy," she mumbled, and he smiled, setting down a bowl in front of her. He turned toward the couch and noticed their guest was awake. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. Breakfast is simple, but it'll warm you up." The woman sat up, folding the blanket neatly before standing. She felt strangely self-conscious in this humble home, almost like she was intruding. But his voice carried no judgment, no discomfort, just quiet hospitality. She joined them at the table, and he placed a bowl in front of her too. The porridge was plain, but somehow it tasted better than any fine meal she'd had in recent memory. Maybe it was the care behind it, or maybe it was just the hunger left over from the long night. The little girl smiled shyly at her. "You were here all night," she said softly, like she couldn't quite believe it. The woman nodded. "Yes, your father was very kind to let me stay. I would have been in real trouble if he hadn't come to help me." The girl looked at her father proudly. "Daddy always helps people. He even gives snacks to the mailman when he looks tired." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't go telling all my secrets," he teased gently, and the girl giggled. The woman watched the exchange quietly, feeling something stir in her chest. She had seen countless boardroom meetings, endless presentations, and polished smiles from people who wanted her attention. But this was different. This was genuine. A father giving his best, a daughter full of love, and a home built on small acts of kindness. It was something she hadn't seen in a long, long time. After breakfast, she insisted on helping clear the table, though he tried to stop her. "You're a guest," he said, but she shook her head. "You helped me. Let me at least do this." They stood side by side at the sink, rinsing bowls and cups while the girl hummed a tune in the background. It felt oddly natural, like they weren't strangers at all, but people who had known each other for years. When the dishes were done, she looked out the window at the road. The storm had left deep puddles and fallen branches scattered everywhere. "My car," she said suddenly, realizing it was still out there. He nodded. "I'll check it for you. It might just be water damage." He grabbed his boots and jacket, and together they walked out into the damp morning air. The car sat half sunken in mud, leaves plastered to the windshield. He crouched down, inspecting it carefully, then opened the hood. After a few minutes of tinkering, he sighed. It'll take a proper day in the garage to fix this. It's not going anywhere today. She bit her lip, worry flickering in her eyes. I see. I have to be in the city soon. He looked at her with quiet reassurance. I understand. But rushing in weather like this could be dangerous. Better safe than sorry. There was no judgment in his words, only calm reasoning. She nodded reluctantly. I suppose you're right. For someone used to being in control, it was strange to have no choice but to wait. Back inside, the little girl was drawing again, this time a picture of the storm. She proudly held it up to their guest. This is you, she said, pointing to a stick figure with messy hair inside a boxy car. And this is Daddy, saving you. The woman laughed softly, touched by the child's simple honesty. That's beautiful, she said warmly. The girl grinned. Daddy's a hero. The man chuckled, ruffling his daughter's hair. Heroes are in the movies. I'm just your dad. But the woman shook her head slightly, watching him. Sometimes real heroes don't wear capes, she said quietly. He met her gaze for a brief second before looking away, almost embarrassed. As the day went on, they shared stories over tea. She didn't reveal much about herself, only that she worked in business and was often traveling. He didn't press for more. Instead, he told her about the town, about how his daughter loved the sea, about how life was hard but meaningful. His words were simple, but each one carried the weight of lived experience. At one point, his daughter climbed into his lap with a book, asking him to read aloud. He opened the pages, his voice soft and steady, filling the room with the magic of fairy tales. The woman listened quietly, her heart aching in a way she hadn't expected. She had wealth, power, influence, yet here, in this little house with its peeling paint and mismatched furniture, she realized she was missing something far more precious. That evening, the storm had fully cleared, and the sky painted itself with streaks of orange and pink. The woman knew she would soon have to leave, but a part of her didn't want to. She felt safe here, grounded in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she finally stood to thank them, her voice carried more weight than she intended. I don't know how to repay you, she said earnestly. You've shown me kindness without even knowing me. The man smiled softly, shaking his head. There's nothing to repay. You were in trouble, and I helped. That's all there is to it. His words were simple, but they struck her like thunder. In her world, everything had a price, everything came with terms. Yet here stood a man who believed in kindness for its own sake. She lingered at the door for a moment longer, looking back at the little girl waving from the table. Goodbye, she said softly. Goodbye, the girl replied. The man gave a small nod, and then she stepped out into the fading light. What she didn't say, what she couldn't yet bring herself to reveal, was who she truly was. She left quietly, carrying with her the memory of a small home, a kind man, and a little girl who called him a hero. And though she drove away in silence, something in her heart told her this was not the last time their paths would cross. Days passed after the storm, and life in the little coastal town returned to its quiet rhythm. The mechanic went back to his workshop, fixing engines, patching up old trucks, and keeping the locals on the road. His daughter returned to her school routine, though she talked often about the lady Daddy saved, as if the visitor from that stormy night had left a mark on her young heart. The man thought of her sometimes too. Not constantly, not in a way that distracted him from his work, but in small, fleeting moments. When he passed the road where her car had broken down, or when he poured a second cup of tea out of habit before realizing it was just him again, he felt the echo of her presence. He didn't know her story, and he hadn't asked. To him, she had been simply a traveler in need, someone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But elsewhere, in the city, beyond the town's edges, her name carried a weight that could move markets. She was not just a woman traveling alone in a storm. She was a powerful figure, the head of a vast company, a billionaire known for her brilliance and discipline. Few people ever saw her outside the polished walls of corporate towers or the pages of business magazines. To most, she was unreachable, almost untouchable. Yet in that little home, on that stormy night, she had been just a woman drinking tea by the fire, wrapped in a borrowed blanket. The news reached the town one morning. A small cafe had left the television on, and the mechanic, stopping by for supplies, caught a glimpse of her face on the screen. The anchor spoke of her attending a major business summit overseas, her decisions shaping industries, her presence commanding attention. He froze mid-step, the bag of screws still in his hand, staring at the screen in disbelief. "That's her," he whispered under his breath. A couple of locals glanced at him curiously, then back at the screen. Some murmured in surprise, others in awe. "Wait, are you saying the lady you helped the other night was her?" someone asked. He didn't answer directly, only gave a faint, almost embarrassed nod. Whispers spread through town like wildfire. The story of the quiet mechanic who had taken in a stranded woman during the storm, only to learn she was a billionaire, quickly became the talk of the streets. Neighbors stopped by his workshop, curious to hear details. Some teased him lightly, others spoke with admiration. But he kept his responses short, almost uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "She needed help, that's all. Anyone would have done the same," he said again and again. But in his heart, he wondered if that was true. Would anyone else have braved that storm? Or was it something in him, something his late wife had always said he carried, a heart that couldn't ignore someone in need? At home, his daughter was more direct. "Daddy, does this mean she's famous? Like the people in magazines?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder. He chuckled, brushing back her hair. "Something like that. But remember, she's still just a person, like us. Titles and money don't change that." The little girl nodded seriously, as though memorizing her father's lesson. Yet, even as he tried to downplay it, part of him couldn't shake the strangeness. The woman who had sat at his table, who had laughed softly at his daughter's drawings, was someone the whole world seemed to admire. And she had walked away, without revealing it. He didn't know if that meant she wanted to hide from the world for a moment, or if she had simply wanted to be seen as herself, not as the figure everyone else expected her to be. 2 days later, as he adjusted the engine of a truck in his garage, the sound of quiet footsteps reached his ears. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag, and there she was. Standing at the doorway, no security guards, no chauffeur, no polished corporate armor, just herself. She looked a little different in the daylight, calmer, yet her presence still carried a weight he couldn't ignore. "You found out," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. He blinked, caught off guard. "It was on the news," he admitted. "The whole town knows now." She stepped inside, her heels clicking lightly against the concrete floor. "I should have told you," she said. "But that night, I just wanted to be a person. Not a CEO, not someone people look at for what I own or control. Just someone who was scared and grateful to be safe." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. And for what it's worth, it wouldn't have mattered to me. I'd have helped either way." Her smile softened, touched by his sincerity. "That's exactly why I came back," she said quietly. "Most people treat me differently when they know who I am. But you only saw a person in trouble." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of tools clinking faintly in the background. She glanced around the garage, taking in the worn shelves, the patched-up equipment, the signs of a man working hard to keep things afloat. "You do all this alone?" she asked gently. He nodded. "It's enough. It pays the bills, keeps food on the table. It's honest work." Her gaze lingered on him, and she thought of the contrast between his life and hers. He lived simply, but with purpose, while she lived surrounded by abundance, yet often felt the weight of emptiness. Something about his steadiness, his quiet dignity, stirred something she hadn't felt in years. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said finally. "Not just with words." He shook his head almost instantly. "There's no need. Really. I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she replied, her voice firm but kind. "That's why I mean it when I say I want to help. Maybe I can support your workshop, get you better tools, more space." He interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "Please. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for handouts. This is my life, my work. I have to stand on my own 2 feet." She looked at him, half expecting him to change his mind, but he didn't. His eyes carried no bitterness, only quiet pride. That refusal, instead of frustrating her, only deepened her respect. He was a man who valued dignity over wealth, who didn't measure life by riches, but by effort and honesty. Her lips curved into a smile, smaller, but more genuine than any she had worn in glossy photographs. "Then maybe I'll just come back for the tea," she said lightly. He chuckled, the tension between them breaking. "That I can manage," he replied. As she left the garage that day, there was no storm outside, only clear skies and sunlight. Yet within both of them, something was shifting, something unspoken but undeniable. For him, she was no longer just a stranger he had saved. For her, he was no longer just the man who pulled her from a flooded road. They were two lives that had crossed in the middle of a storm, and neither of them could pretend it hadn't changed something. The following week passed quietly in the town. The storm was already a memory for most people, but not for the man and his daughter. They carried it with them in small ways. When the girl drew pictures of a car stuck in the rain, or when the man caught himself looking out at the road, half expecting to see headlights appear in the distance again. And then, one afternoon, she came back. This time not because of broken machinery or bad weather, but by choice. She stepped out of a simple sedan, dressed not in business suits, but in plain clothes that made her blend into the quiet streets. To the neighbors, she looked like just another visitor. But to him, the sight of her walking up to the workshop felt strangely significant. "You're back," he said, setting down the wrench in his hand. She gave a soft smile. "I promised I'd return for tea." He chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "Most people don't keep promises that small." "I do," she replied, her tone carrying more weight than the words themselves. Inside the house, his daughter's eyes lit up when she saw her. "You came back," the little girl exclaimed, rushing forward. The woman bent down, meeting her at eye level, and the girl hugged her tightly, without hesitation. Something about the embrace caught the woman off guard. It had been years since anyone had held her like that without expecting something in return. The three of them sat together that evening. The man brewed tea, pouring it into chipped cups, while the little girl brought over her drawings to show their guest. "This one's you," she said proudly, pointing to a stick figure in a red dress. The woman laughed gently, touched by the child's simple world. "I look very tall," she teased, and the girl giggled. The man watched quietly, noticing how naturally she fit into the room. For someone who lived in a world of boardrooms and skyscrapers, she seemed surprisingly comfortable here in a home that was far from perfect. She didn't act out of place, didn't frown at the mismatched furniture or the cracked paint on the walls. Instead, she listened, she laughed, and she gave the child her full attention. Later, after the girl had gone to bed, the two adults sat in the quiet living room. The woman sipped her tea, her gaze lingering on the photographs of his late wife that still hung on the wall. "You've done so much on your own," she said softly. "It must not have been easy." He shrugged gently. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. She deserves the best I can give. And sometimes, even in the hardest days, there's joy. You'd be surprised how far a child's laughter can carry you." Her eyes softened. "You speak about it so simply, but there's strength in it. A different kind of strength than the one I'm used to seeing." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of her words settling between them. She wanted to tell him everything, that her world was filled with endless responsibilities, constant pressure, and people who wanted her wealth more than her company. But she didn't say it out loud. Somehow, she felt he already knew, even without details. Instead, she changed the subject. "Do you ever think of leaving this town? Starting fresh somewhere else?" He shook his head. "This is home. My daughter has her school, her friends. And I have the garage. It may not be much, but it's ours. I don't need more than that." His answer surprised her. She had always been told that success meant more money, more power, more growth. But here was a man who measured life differently, who found contentment not in having everything, but in appreciating what he already held. And in that moment, she envied him. Over the next few days, she visited again and again. Sometimes she arrived with groceries, insisting on helping cook dinner. Other times she simply came to sit and talk, or to play board games with the little girl, who adored her more with each passing day. To the man it was strange, but also comforting, having another adult in the house, sharing laughter, sharing silence. One evening, as they all sat at the table eating together, the little girl spoke up suddenly. "Are you going to be my auntie?" she asked innocently, looking at the woman. The man nearly choked on his food, while the woman laughed, her cheeks warming. "That's not how it works," she said softly. But when the girl went to bed later that night, the woman caught his eyes lingering on her. "She likes you," he said quietly. "And you?" she asked, almost without thinking. He hesitated, then gave a small smile. "You've brought something into this house I didn't realize was missing. I can't explain it." Her heart tightened at his words. For years, she had lived in places full of people but felt completely alone. Yet here, in a small house with peeling wallpaper, she felt seen in a way she hadn't before. The next day, she visited his garage again, watching him work on an old truck. "You really manage all this by yourself," she said, admiring his patience as he tightened bolts and checked wires. "You could do so much more with better equipment." He wiped his brow. "Maybe, but I've never been one to chase bigger things. I just want enough to give my daughter a stable life." She nodded, but inside she was already thinking. She couldn't change who he was, she didn't want to. But maybe she could support him without insulting his pride, without making it feel like charity. Not through money handed over, but through something that felt natural. That evening, as they shared tea again, she made a promise to herself. She would not push him to accept help. Instead, she would keep coming back, keep being present, keep showing him that her interest was not in what he lacked, but in who he was. And little by little, she realized it wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It wasn't about repaying a debt from a stormy night. It was about something deeper, something that grew quietly each time she stepped through his door, something that made her laugh more freely than she had in years. For him, the presence of this woman was both surprising and grounding. She belonged to a world he would never enter, yet she chose to sit at his table, to share tea in his chipped cups, to listen to his daughter's stories as if they were treasures. He didn't know what it meant for the future, but he knew one thing for certain. Life felt a little less heavy when she was around. And for her, the visits had become more than escapes. They had become a kind of home she didn't know she was missing. Weeks turned into months, and the woman's visits became a part of the little family's routine. At first, the neighbors whispered, curious about why someone from the city kept showing up at the small workshop or walking hand in hand with a mechanic's daughter through the market. But over time, the whispers faded, replaced by quiet acceptance. It didn't matter who she was in the outside world. Here, she was simply a friend who had found a place at their table. She spent evenings helping with homework, afternoons cooking meals, and quiet nights sipping tea by the stove. Slowly, the little girl began calling her by a special nickname, one she made up herself, a blend of affection and comfort. And though the woman never said it aloud, she cherished that name more than any title she had earned in boardrooms or magazines. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, the man and the woman walked together along the edge of the sea. The air smelled of salt, and the waves lapped gently against the shore. His daughter ran ahead, laughing as she collected seashells. The man carried his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've built quite a life here," she said softly. He shrugged. "It's not much, but it's ours. I never imagined it would mean anything to someone like you." She glanced at him. "Someone like me?" "You know what I mean," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You live in a world of wealth and power. I'm just a man trying to raise his daughter and fix cars to get by. We couldn't be more different." For a moment, she was quiet. Then she said, "Maybe that's true on paper. But in reality, you have something I've been searching for my whole life. You have peace. You have love. You have a home. I've spent years surrounded by everything money can buy, yet nothing ever felt as real as the nights I've spent in your kitchen, drinking tea from those chipped cups." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The man turned his head, studying her. For the first time, he realized the truth. She didn't keep coming back because she felt she owed him something. She came back because she needed this life as much as they needed her. That evening, back at the house, the little girl insisted they all eat dinner together. She had drawn another picture, this one of 3 figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. She placed it proudly in the center of the table. "That's us," she explained. "Daddy, me, and you." The woman's eyes softened as she looked at the drawing. She reached across the table, brushing her fingers gently over the paper. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The man gave his daughter a smile, but in his eyes there was something deeper, a quiet recognition that life was changing, piece by piece. The days that followed only confirmed it. The woman began spending more time not in boardrooms, but in the town. She still handled her responsibilities in the city, but she returned as often as she could, choosing the warmth of a modest home over the coldness of corporate towers. She watched the little girl grow more attached to her, and to her surprise, she grew attached as well, not just to the child, but to the man who carried his world with quiet strength. One evening, when the stars were bright and the town slept in silence, she sat with him outside on the porch. The air was cool, and the only sound was the distant crash of waves. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You changed my life the night you opened your door. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. You reminded me what really matters." He turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should." She shook her head gently. "No, you did what very few would. You didn't care who I was. You didn't see my money or my title. You just saw me. And no one's done that in a very long time." There was a long pause, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement that their lives were no longer separate threads, but had begun to weave together. The little girl's voice suddenly broke the silence as she called from inside, "Daddy, story time." Both of them laughed softly, standing to go in. But as they stepped inside, side by side, the man felt something shift in his heart, a sense that his life, once defined by loss and struggle, was slowly opening into something new. In the weeks that followed, it became clear to everyone in town. This was not just a chance meeting anymore. It was the beginning of a family, born not from wealth or status, but from kindness and connection. And though the world would always see her as a billionaire CEO, to the man and his daughter, she was something far more precious, the woman who became part of their home, not because of what she had, but because of who she was. For her, the storm that had once filled her with fear had become the very thing that led her to the life she didn't know she was searching for. And for him, the act of kindness he thought was small turned out to be the beginning of a love story written not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments of a family finding one another. The storm had ended long ago, but what it left behind was brighter than either of them could have imagined.